This is Sam Long. I'm Ron Peters.
And I'm John Nugent.
Welcome to the After Class Podcast, because the best conversations happen
after class.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of the After Class Podcast. We're glad to have you along. The three of us are in the ending stages of the semester, which we're very excited about, wrapping up grading and other sorts of things and grade inputting. So we're pretty pumped about our Christmas break starting very soon. The sooner we get it done, the better.
Exactly. Yeah. How far into your grading are you?
Very. For once. Yeah. Usually I'm at the back end.
Right. I mean, I should be done by the end of the day tomorrow, assuming everybody gets me all the stuff. I've got a small handful of students I'm still waiting on, but if everybody can get me their stuff, I could be done tomorrow.
Yeah. I finished late last night, and then
nice.
Today I have another long list of administrative to-dos I'm kind of checking off.
Yeah.
One at a time. So, yeah, grading's done, but the work is not.
Work is never
Work don't stop.
No.
Yeah, but it slows down for the holiday.
Well, once the grading's done, I immediately have to start getting ready for next semester. Got to get syllabi together, got to get stuff on Moodle and everything. So, but I don't know. I always say every year between Christmas and New Year, that week between Christmas and New Year, I just try to take it as a week off. You know, the week before, the week after, I can get ready. But I like to have 1 week where it's just like that decompression time. So that's what I'm hoping for. We'll see if it plays out. Oh, but we're going on a cafe. We're going on the cafe crawl with Jordan. We're looking forward to that.
Cafe hop.
Yes, it is. See, I always say cafe crawl, and he says cafe hop. So it's probably the better way of describing it. But going from one cafe to the next, that'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, beer crawls, because
that's where I got the link.
You have to crawl after having so many.
That's exactly it.
But you hop, you get this energy. You're popping from place to place.
Yep. It is a better description. I just can't get away from that crawl. Crawl lingo.
So. Yeah. Because you're so used to doing those.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, that would be me.
So, exciting week of correspondence with our listeners.
Yep, it has been interesting.
Apparently, a Shamgar episode raised lots of questions.
It did. Yeah, there were a lot of people who were surprised, I guess, to find out it was a satire. They were surprised in the middle of it. They were a little surprised by what we were saying. At first, they thought, oh, this is really interesting. And the more it went on, they're like, wait a minute, this doesn't sound right. And even though at the end of it, as you were signing us off, John, you used the word satire, there were some people who were just still not quite sure what to do with it. And even the little tricks that Drew put in there, people just weren't quite sure. And so we've had a lot of conversations and some emails with people and trying to explain what we were doing. But it made us go, you know what? We could have maybe been a little more obvious to let people know that don't take us seriously. We're having a lot of fun here. We're trying to illustrate some really bad hermeneutical things that people do. But my concern this whole time, even before we did it, my concern was people wouldn't catch it, that they would take it seriously and kind of run with the things we were doing. Nobody's done that. But yeah, I think we could have done more to let people in on the joke.
Some were relieved to listen to the second episode and say, oh, okay, right. I knew something was up.
Right.
I didn't realize, and some people, reached out to us to say, hey, what was up with that? And others like, I'm not so sure about that. And others are like, that can't be right. They're like, So I think the second episode really helped clarify things for lots of people. But yeah, it's the catch-22. If you kind of like come out saying this is a satire and then do it, then and it loses some of the persuasive value of how twisted versions of biblical interpretation work.
Exactly.
Right. And so it ended up doing for some of our listeners more than we thought, which is expose, I think, for them, like, yeah, sometimes I can be given to fantastical interpretations. Yeah. Like I am susceptible to doing that, right?
Yeah.
And maybe some people thought maybe I wasn't as susceptible. And the fact that I got drawn in so easily was kind of a shocker.
Yeah. Well, I think that, to your point, I agree with you. We try to make really good, solid, biblical, historical, arguments for the things that we advocate for here. And, I appreciate that people pay attention. I appreciate that people, trust the things that we're saying. Having said that, I tell my students here, check me out. Don't just say, well, Ron says it, Dr. Peters says it, it must be true. Check me out on things. sometimes, I'm still wrong. And so go check me out. And I want our listeners to feel free to do that. Check us out. Check out the things we're saying. Feel free to write in and say, you guys said this. What what about this other consideration? And do that. And so what I like is that there were people going, what are these guys saying? It's not like, oh, they got it all figured out. This is so cool. I can't wait to go tell people about this. There were listeners who were going, wait a minute. That's great because you're doing exactly what I would want you to do. And go, I'm not so sure about that. I'm going to ask for some clarification. Good job.
Yeah, we tried.
It was an experiment. It yielded very diverse results.
Yes.
Don't know if we're going to go down that path.
Maybe next time we do it, we'll maybe do it closer to April Fool's Day.
That might be the way to go.
Yeah.
But to be clear, I mean, this wasn't a fool ya, gotcha kind of thing. This was a satire. We're taking a practice that is common and we are exposing it. Mm-hmm. And if you don't do it in a convincing way, what have you done?
Right.
So
exactly.
But anyway, sorry if it disturbed you too much.
Agree.
Hopefully you'll recover soon.
I agree. In the meantime, we've got some new to talk about.
Jail.
Exactly. It's been a little while ago, somebody sent us a question about the millennium. I'm trying to remember. I didn't stop to go back and see who it was. Do you remember who it was?
I do not.
Anyway,
off the top of my head.
Somebody sent us a question regarding the millennium in the book of Revelation and just wanted us to tackle that and, talk about some of the possible interpretations and what we think is going on with the millennium.
And I think in particular it was asking about the first versus second resurrection.
Yeah.
Like a question about, wait, there's more than one resurrection? Mm-hmm. What is going on in Revelation 20?
Okay, yeah. And, it just opens up this whole interesting conversation about, what is the millennium and these resurrections and everything that's taking place there. And, I teach on Revelation, every year in my New Testament 2 class, and I've taught out in church. But it was an opportunity to dive in and read some stuff I haven't read in a while regarding, the millennium. And even outside the New Testament, what a lot of people don't realize is that there are other Jewish texts from around the same time period that talk about a similar time frame. And so what we want to do today is talk about the millennium, what's going on there, how these multiple resurrections kind of play into the unfolding of the story, and then try to figure out exactly what John, the author, is trying to do as he talks about this, 1,000-year time period. And so we should probably read the text first, just so everybody can kind of get on board with that. And because I don't have my Bible in front of me at the moment.
Oh boy, got it memorized apparently. It's from Revelation chapter 20. If you have no idea what he's talking about, and so I'll read it. Revelation 20. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain. He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the pit, and locked and sealed it over him, so that he would deceive the nations no more, until 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be let out for a little while. Then I saw thrones, and those seated on them were given authority to judge. I also saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for the testimony of Jesus and for the word of God. They had not worshipped the beast or its image, and had received the mark on their foreheads or hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy are those who share in the first resurrection. Over these the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and they will reign with him 1,000 years. I'm going to just keep going. When the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, in order to gather them for battle. They are as numerous as the sands on the sea, and it kind of goes on with that.
Yeah. And so I think the first thing we want to do is put this vision in its broader literary context and try to understand how it fits into the broader story of the book of Revelation. Now, there are some people out there who think that all of Revelation is looking to the future, that Revelation is all about future events. When they see the beast of Revelation, they assume that this is a future person that's often, sort of coalesced with the Antichrist, who is going to be like this one world ruler. This is what you see in like the Left Behind series, that all that. I'm old enough to remember the late great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey that was published back in the 70s that espoused this particular view. I do not hold to that view, even though once upon a time I did, and that's kind of how I taught Revelation. There came a point where I realized that that was a very difficult paradigm to really maintain with regard to the book of Revelation. And as I began to restudy it, realized, oh no, most of Revelation made sense to the people who heard it in the first century. And they could associate the imagery with things from their own experience. Without getting too deep into the description of it, the beast of Revelation, in all likelihood, represents the Roman Empire, as well as the false prophet, which represents what we would call the imperial cult, which is a sort of network of temples dedicated to the worshiping of Rome as a god or the Caesars as gods. And something that's hard for modern Americans to really relate to, that religion and politics were just joined together. By going to these temples and offering up sacrifices and doing these kinds of things, you were showing your loyalty to the empire. And refusal to participate in these temples, and then more broadly, participating in other forms of idolatrous worship, was seen as a form of rebellion. Why are you not submitting to Rome? What are you guys going to start some sort of uprising? What's wrong with you? You're upending all the things that we hold here as Roman citizens. And so what John is trying to do is he's trying to inspire his Christian audience to maintain their exclusive allegiance to God and to Jesus. And so he's portraying Rome as an agent of Satan. There are people who are saying, hey, we can light a candle, or we can go to the parade and wave our little I love Rome flags or something like that. And John's saying, no, anytime you give in to Rome, you are giving in not only to God's enemy, you're getting into our enemy, which is Satan. Satan is the enemy of God's people. And so he's trying to portray Rome in the worst possible way.
Yeah, so to be clear, there was no such thing as separation of church and state.
Not at all.
Right? They were one and the same. And any lack of allegiance to Rome was sedition. And so by claiming someone else as God or as Messiah or as Lord, say Jesus, for example, would have been viewed as a capital offense. Yep. And so people just don't understand the import of a lot of times of what's going on in the first century and in Revelation. I don't understand the big deal about just saying Jesus is Lord. No, that's like saying I wish China would come in and take over America. That's like a treasonous type of thing in the first century.
Yeah, that failure to go to the temples. That's exactly, you're right, Sam. That's exactly how it was viewed. And they're proclaiming Jesus as king. We talked about in a previous episode not long ago about how good news was a politically loaded kind of a statement. Right. And so everything about giving your exclusive to allegiance to Jesus means withholding it from any other human or worldly institution or person. And that's exactly what John is trying to do. But he's saying, I get it. If you do this, you're going to suffer. Totally understand. And you just have to brace yourself for that. Suffering is going to happen. And these worldly powers who are temporarily in charge are the ones who are going to inflict that upon you. But I want to inspire you so that when you go through it, you will be able to hold on to your confession of faith, because we know in the end we win. We may temporarily suffer, but in the end, we're on the winning side. God is going to bring down Rome. He's going to bring down the beast and the false prophet. Satan himself will ultimately be defeated, and we will be on the winning side. And so that is something worth holding on to, and it's something worth suffering for. And so I think that's kind of the story of Revelation. And so you get the beast, you get the false prophet. Eventually you get the great whore of Babylon, which is the city of Rome. This whore sits on 7 hills. Really easy to figure that one out. Rome was a city built on 7 hills. In fact, the imagery in Roman coins and stuff is always of this beautiful woman sitting in a temple, sitting on 7 hills. And so it's pretty easy to prove that that's what that represents.
Right. And so to be clear, all of the downfall of all of that takes place in chapter 19.
Yep.
Right before this.
Yeah.
So the beast, the false prophet, it all goes down.
Yep.
Right before chapter 20 begins, and this what I read takes place about the whole dragon and the 1,000-year reign.
Yeah. Yeah, chapter 18 is all about the downfall of the city. Chapter 19 is, in the meantime, we rejoice. Rome is falling, and all the people who are getting rich from their allegiance with Rome are losing that. But we get to rejoice. Their grief is our time of victory. And so on the heels of that, again, at the end of chapter 19, the beasts of false prophet are defeated. Satan himself in chapter 20 is bound. And so what does the millennium do then in the context of this story? And so those are the kinds of questions that we want to ask. First and foremost, one question is it a literal 1,000 years? Is this a literal 1,000-year time period, or is it just a metaphor for a really long time? Some people, again, think it's a literal 1,000 years, but so much of Revelation is imagery that's not meant to be taken literally, but does have sort of a real-world referent. I'd be kind of inclined to go, don't take it as a literal 1,000 years. Just take it as a really long period of time. That's where when we get into the non-canonical literature, maybe that can help us out a little bit. If we look at something like 4th Ezra, I know you've got yours there.
Yeah, I can do some reading here.
Yeah, let's take a look at what 4th Ezra says that I think people will go, oh, wow, that actually sounds very similar to what we're reading here. Or is it 4th Ezra or 2 Baruch where he talks about 4th Ezra where he talks about
so there are 2 writings in the intertestamental literature, so they're not in the Old or New Testament.
Yep.
And they're not actually intertestamental in that they don't happen after the Old Testament and before the New. They're kind of contemporaneous with some of the New Testament writings, dated to the second half, the latter part of the 1st century AD.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And these are strictly Jewish works, and you can tell this because Jesus has already come before these are written, and they're not describing anything that has to do with Jesus.
Right.
So they're late first century. They're Jewish works, but most importantly, they're apocalyptic works, and this is what makes them helpful for making comparisons.
Yeah.
Like John, the author of Revelation, was a Jewish apocalypticist, right?
Yep.
He was a Messianic Jew, right? But he was participating in Jewish literature, and so in 4th Ezra, which is also sometimes called 2nd Esdras, chapter 7, verses 28 to 34, read like this: "For my son, the Messiah, shall be revealed with those who are with him." And this is kind of like Revelation, where lots of stuff has happened before this, right? The turbulence among the nations and all that. So then the son of the Messiah will be revealed with those who are with him, and those who remain shall rejoice 400 years. After those years, my son, the Messiah, shall die, and all who draw human breath. Then the world shall be turned back to primeval silence for 7 days, as it was at the first beginnings, so that no one shall be left. After 7 days, the world that is not yet awake shall be roused, and that which is corruptible shall perish. The earth shall give up those who are asleep in it, and the dust those who rest there in silence. And the chambers shall give up the souls that have been committed to them. The Most High shall be revealed on the seat of judgment, and compassion shall pass away, and patience shall be withdrawn. Only judgment shall remain, truth shall stand, and faithfulness shall grow strong. And then it continues to talk about the final judgment.
Yeah.
So what's interesting to me about this passage is there's this period of 400 years, right, where there's rejoicing for the people of the Messiah.
Yeah.
And then that period ends, and then that sets up the final judgment.
Yep.
And so I think 400 is, as a number, strikingly close to 1,000.
Yeah.
In terms of, 1,000 is a multiple of tens.
Yep.
Right. And for the Jewish people, 10 is a significant number. If you're talking like a large number of 10, you're talking 1,000.
Yep.
And 40 was also a significant number.
Yeah.
Because of the 40 years in the wilderness.
Yep.
That's a significant time period for God's people. You make it a multiple of 10, and you have 400.
Right.
So from a Jewish perspective, these are a large swath of time that's a multiple of numbers that are important to them, 10 and 40.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what you do in apocalyptic literature. Apocalyptic literature uses symbolic numbers to mark time.
Yep. And you see that all through Revelation. You have periods of like 7 years, 40 years, half of a 7, or things like that, which again should not be taken literally, but should be understood as these just Bible-y numbers. They have theological significance, but don't read too much into them. And so, as you said, John, these are numbers that are multiples of Bible numbers, and they represent a long period of time. Not the same, but similar enough to make us go, okay, well, is there anything else that we should look at that maybe plays out? Both of them represent times of the Messiah being in a time of ascendancy, bringing a time of prosperity to his people, which at the end of which is followed by a time of judgment and resurrection. God's going to bring his judgment upon the wicked. We see that in Revelation and in 4th Ezra. And resurrection is going to happen as well. And so, okay, kind of interesting. Again, not identical. There's a lot of differences that people can point out. But the similarities are enough to make us go, all right, well, let's see if we can bring these things into conversation with each other and see what they do to help us maybe understand even what John is doing. The other one would be 2nd Baruch. So we want to read that one as well. So that people can again say, oh, it's not even just these two, but there's one other one that's somewhat similar.
Yeah, I'll read this.
Thank you.
It's chapter 29, 3 through 31. And it will happen that when all of that which should come to pass in these parts has been accomplished, the Anointed One will begin to be revealed. And Behemoth will reveal itself from its place, and Leviathan will come from the sea. And and 2 great monsters which I created on the 5th day of creation, and which I shall have kept until that time. And they will be nourishment for all who are left. The earth will also yield fruits 10,000-fold. And on one vine there will be 1,000 branches, and one branch will produce 1,000 clusters, and one cluster will produce 1,000 grapes, and one grape will produce 1 core of wine. And those who are hungry will enjoy themselves, and they will, moreover, see marvels every day. For winds will go out from in front of me every morning to bring the fragrance of aromatic fruits, and clouds at the end of the day to distill the dew of health. And it will happen at that time that the treasury of manna will come down again from on high, and they will eat of it in those years, because these are those who will have arrived at the consummation of time. And it will happen after these things, when the time of appearance of the Anointed One has been fulfilled, and he returns with splendor, that then all who sleep in hope of him will rise.
So people are going to eat hippopotamuses and crocodiles. Is that
Correct.
what it's saying there?
Yep. It reminds me of on the way to San Antonio, I was watching Meg 2.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You both were kind of watching along without any sound, which is so great.
We really didn't need the sound.
No, you didn't need it. It was that bad.
Caught the whole plot.
Yeah, pretty much. But there's this part of the plot is there's this layer of like heat or cold that the lower animals don't cross, including the giant Meg, until there's an explosion that opened it up that allowed one to go through. That's what it reminded me of as you're reading that. They're going to bring him from the depths, and here comes Meg / Leviathan / Behemoth. Anyway, sorry, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about.
Yeah. And this doesn't mention like a period of 1,000 years
Right, yeah.
or 400 years or 700 years, any symbolic number. But you still have like the appearance of the Anointed One, the Messiah, in a time of prosperity.
Yep.
And then kind of the end time judgment comes and the resurrection from the dead.
Yep.
So we have this period before the final period of judgment and resurrection.
Yeah. And so I think what all these things have in common is that they're designed to give inspiration to the people of God. And that's the way all apocalypses work. Here, we think of apocalypses in the Bible being Daniel and Revelation. You get some little kind of mini apocalypses in other places, but those are like the 2 big apocalyptic books that we encounter in Scripture. But there are other ones, 2 Baruch and 4 Ezra are also apocalypses. And what they're designed to do is to bring inspiration to the people of God. God's people are suffering. In Daniel, God's people are suffering in Babylon. Later, they're suffering under Antiochus Epiphanes. And so it's like, I want to inspire you to maintain your faithfulness to God. Even though you are going to go through hard times, I can't tell you won't happen. It is going to happen. You're going to suffer. But the glories that await us make that suffering so worthwhile. And Revelation says the same thing to Christians. You're going to suffer. I hate to tell you this, but you're going to suffer. But the glories that are awaiting us are so great that it'll make the suffering worthwhile. And so apocalyptic literature, among many things, is designed to inspire people with that kind of confidence. And I think that this vision of a future time where, either the Messiah or the Anointed One is in this period of ascendancy, and this time is characterized by prosperity and provision for the people of God, is a part of how it does that. Know that this is what awaits. In the book of Revelation, you get this vision of the beast and the false prophet being defeated by Jesus. They're not even defeated by the people of God. It's not like the people of God take up arms and begin to fight back and somehow defeat them. It's like, no, that Jesus does it. Jesus does it by himself with the sword that comes out of his mouth, which is just his word. He doesn't even fight them in battle or anything like that, but it is the word of God as proclaimed by Jesus that brings them down and brings about their defeat. And so know that that's going to happen. Know that we're going to be on the other side of that, the winning side, which will be followed by a time of God's people enjoying the prosperity that goes with the Anointed One being in this place of rule.
I think that's an interesting distinction between the two texts, though. Especially Baruch frames it as this wonderful time of prosperity, whereas Revelation, it's just you're not going to be annoyed by the serpent anymore. You're not going to be tempted or attacked. Like there's like a more of a peace versus a prosperity.
Yeah.
Between this, I think that's a very interesting distinction between the two texts.
Yeah, you make a really good observation on that.
Thank
it
you.
Doesn't. You're right, because Revelation doesn't make all the grand promises that you see like in Baruch.
I mean, 21 technically does, but then that's a whole discussion of what's that compared to 20, right? Is it continuing the story, or is this something else completely, which is kind of what we're talking about today?
Yeah, I mean, 21, 22 are like post-resurrection.
Right.
This is like renewal, new heaven, new earth, the final culmination of everything that God's doing in the world. So you're right, those provide the grand promises, but the millennium is just like, hey, Satan's not going to bug you anymore. And
it's a terrible thing to say, but it's like the bully didn't show up at school today. It's like, oh, we can just enjoy school today.
I know, I can keep my lunch
like
money and all that kind of stuff. But for people who are suffering, imagine first century, people at the end of the first century living in like Ephesus or Smyrna or whatever, who are like, man, we're really going through hard times. And it's because our local leaders are mad because we're not going to the temples. The local civic leaders in Ephesus are putting the pressure on the people of God, saying, you're either going to come to the temples like we want you to, or we're going to make your life difficult. Best case scenario is nobody's going to do business with you. They're not going to come to your shops or hire you. Mm-hmm. And you've got to sit down and look at your wife and your kids going, where are we going to get food today? Worst case scenario, we'll arrest you, we'll torture you, maybe we'll even put you to death. And I get it. I don't want to be tortured. Sitting here like if somebody said, hey, Ron, you're a Christian, guess what? We're going to torture you and you might die. I'm like, I'm not saying I want to go through that. I'm not excited about it. But somehow John's got to say to his people, guys, if it comes to that, are you willing to maintain your confession of Jesus in the face of that? It's funny because that makes me think of the, you guys are probably familiar with the letter of Pliny to Trajan from the 2nd century. Pliny was
classic.
Yeah, I know, right? Everybody's read it, right?
Just read it last week.
Pliny was the governor of Bithynia, and he wrote a letter to Trajan sometime in the early 2nd century. What do I do with Christians? But what Pliny says, the thing that frustrates him the most, their biggest sort of like sin, is their obstinance. Like that's what he says. They're so obstinate. If they would just offer up a sacrifice or light a candle or whatever.
Yeah, throw us a bone, bro.
I know. We'll
let
something.
you off the hook. Yeah.
But they won't do it. And, here are Christians in Pliny's time who have heard John's message and saying, we will not give in to Rome.
All right, so let's get to some of the questions. Like, what's with these 2 resurrections? What's with multiple deaths?
Yep.
What's with 1,000 years?
Yeah.
If
No
it's
idea.
not literal, what is it?
Yep.
I think we get the purpose, right?
Yep.
The big picture vision of what John's trying to do, but I don't know, how far do we go with these numbers?
Right. And so when we talk about the resurrections, Revelation 20, verse 4, then I saw thrones, and those seated on them were given authority to judge. I also saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their testimony to Jesus and for the word of God. They had not worshipped the beast or its image, not received its brand on their foreheads or hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until 1,000 years were ended. And so some people think that this is a vision of all Christians. The first resurrection is for all the followers of Jesus. Possible, but the text would suggest that maybe it's not even all Christians, because it says those
How
who
do you
were
get, how do you get all Christians out of those
Beheaded.
who were beheaded?
Yeah.
exactly. That's the whole point.
It's a special martyr resurrection.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and so I think that this is part of John's strategy. For those of you who are afraid that you might have to die for Jesus, I'm saying if you die for Jesus, there's something special. You're actually better off. The ones who aren't martyred, who get to live, even if it's a hard life, sure, it's going to go great for them in the end. They get to be part of the victory celebration. But if you die, if you die in your testimony, you have a special blessing. You get like this early resurrection. Now, again, I'm not saying it's a literal. I want to make sure it's not literal. But he's trying to say, don't be afraid of even dying.
I mean, I think that's important. That's what the words of the text are saying.
Yeah.
If it's literal, it's literally saying there's going to be an early resurrection.
Little VIP access.
Yeah, VIP
Right,
access for the martyrs.
Yep.
And maybe the purpose of Satan being bound for 1,000 years is for these people to be able to enjoy like what was robbed of them of this
Right.
life. Like they get back the life that was taken from them because Satan and his minions and destructive forces are out of the way and they can enjoy what was denied them. And then, the rest of salvation history for everyone else will happen. So whatever the millennium is here, it seems to be a comfort to those who accepted death.
Yeah.
That God sees you, he notices you, he plans to reward you.
Yep.
And you get to experience that in this special way.
Yep.
So if one were to take this literally, that seems to be the plain sense appropriation of the text, right? There's doesn't include other people, right? So if we're going to say, yes, there's this 1,000-year reign, this is what it looks like. If you weren't martyred, you're still in Sheol / Hades until the resurrection. If you were martyred, you get early access to bliss, right? But that's the extent of what it can mean.
Yeah. But what's weird about that though, is then in verse 7, when 1,000 years are ended, Satan is released and comes out and deceives the nations. And then there's a battle. So it's like the martyrs aren't the only ones around.
Yeah.
The nations are still there.
Right.
And able to be deceived. So that kind of, even that plain sense gets a little,
Right.
it's unclear that whatever they're experiencing is something that's like, they get control of the earth for 1,000 years, and then all of us get to come back. It's like, now they seem to be sharing it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like all evil is not taken away.
Right.
Just the power of satanic forces to screw with your life is taken away.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean, your neighbor's not going to be an idiot.
Right. Yeah.
So this is not reincarnation, we're suggesting.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Like,
Definitely
because
not that.
and that's one, it could be an interpretation. Like, someone gets reincarnated as someone else for a while and you get to live a different life without Satan's attacks. But
Yeah. And I've seen another interpretation of this, and that is that this thing with the martyrs, if you notice in verse 4, it says, "Then I saw thrones," right? And there are earlier in Revelation, there are throne visions.
Yep.
And there are throne visions of God, and there are martyrs that are kind of in his wings in heavenly places, right? And so I've heard it said that this part here, like beginning in verse 4, is talking about in the heavenly showroom, right? Like
Right.
the souls of the martyrs are kind of with Christ as he's reigning over the new creation in the era of the church.
Yeah.
So like on the ground, it's the time period of Satan has been bound and defeated. And maybe that's like what the cross did, right?
Mhm.
The fatal blow, the disarming of the powers and principalities, the exposing of them. And then you have the era of the church where the gospel's going out to all nations. And meanwhile, the martyrs have like front row seats to Christ's reign and have some kind of special privileged state during this time period.
Yeah.
That's one way I've seen this interpreted.
Well, I mean, you see that, going back to what you said, John, in chapter 6, verse 9, when you have the 7 seals being broken, he says, "When I broke the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slaughtered for the word of God and for the testimony they had given. And they cried out, 'Sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long will it be before you judge and avenge our blood on the inhabitants of the earth?'" And so again, it's not all Christians. This isn't every Christian there. This is the martyrs. And, you
And
said
soul language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you said something earlier, does God even know? like when you're suffering and it looks like Rome's in control, your local aristocracy is persecuting you. And it's like, I thought our God was the ruler. I thought Jesus was a king. I thought God was the creator. If God's the creator, why are we suffering like this? Where is God? Is he blind? Is he deaf? Does he not know what's going on with us? And that's why I think John is trying to say God is acutely aware. He knows exactly what's going on. And especially for those who look like they were defeated. Okay, if you've been beheaded, Rome is saying, you lose, we win, we're in charge, and you're dead. That's why words like victory show up so often in Revelation, that we are the conquerors, we are the victors. Well, he doesn't have a head, doesn't look like a conqueror to me. Well, you've got to look ahead further. He may have temporarily suffered, but at the end, these people are the victors. They are the conquerors. And so, I think that there's a special emphasis on those who gave up their lives. Revelation is written for all of us, but especially for those who paid the ultimate price of dying for the sake of their confession.
I don't want to belabor this because we have a lot of things to talk about. But is it possible that John expects everyone to die, for everyone to be martyred? If you're a true follower, then there's no other in for you?
It's a good question. I don't think he does. I don't think he expects everybody to die. I think he expects everybody to be willing to die.
Okay. As opposed to separating two groups, it's like, well, of course you're all going to be down there because you all will have stood up for your faith, and that would be the result. But anyway, I don't need to belabor it, but it's just a thought.
It's still a good question. I think he expects all of us to be willing. I think John knows that a lot of average Christians are not going to be hauled in. Like the people who are probably getting hauled in are what Rome would think are the ringleaders, the leaders in the church. And so, Revelation, I think, has a special message for those who are publicly known as leaders, vocal leaders in the church. But having said that, again, maybe you're not a leader in the church, but if you're a more wealthy person living in Ephesus who's become a follower of Jesus, you might not be a leader, but you are conspicuous enough that you're going to get Rome's attention.
Okay. Is it worthwhile kind of talking about the three different millennialisms to the interpretation?
Definitely.
I mean, one interpretation of what we do with this 1,000-year period, we kind of talk about the text, right? Like it's 1,000 years where the devil's bound, and then the martyrs get to enjoy reigning with Jesus. And then there's another time of craziness until the final judgment. Jesus comes, everyone comes to everlasting life. Yay.
Don't seem so excited about it, John.
So there's kind of three positions that people have talked about. One is millennialism.
Right.
One is post-millennialism, and the other is amillennialism. And there's different variants of each of them too.
Of course.
Historical premillennialism is kind of the most literal, right? Like this is going to happen literally. It's like we're not reading this like it's apocalyptic and symbolic. Like very literally, these events are going to happen as they are described and in this order.
Yep.
Although historic premillennialism often kind of merges with rapture theology, and it's not just the martyrs, but everyone.
Right.
So. But that's the most literal version of it. Then there is postmillennialism, which kind of reads this as this 1,000 years is the period that we're living in now, and society progressively gets better and better and better and better because Satan is bound. Right, there is this prosperity that's allowed, and we reach this human progress. Right, and then Jesus comes, and then there's the final judgment. Yeah, is that your understanding?
Basically, yes. Agreed.
Yeah, and then amillennialism says you're taking all this way too literally. This isn't really a time where martyrs are literally here and Satan's literally there. It's just describing the period. The end has not come yet. There is an era yet, even though the beast will be defeated, like the Roman Empire will fall. There's still a period before the second coming when Christ figures everything out. And that is the age of the church that we're living in. It's not 1,000 years, but that's a round number or a symbolic number to describe the perfect amount of time between the fall of the enemy that is and then the coming of Christ.
Yeah.
Is that about right?
Sure. I mean, yeah, we could have lots
really
of episodes about these, but that's more than sufficient.
Well, and I could see one brand of amillennialism tying itself to the fall of Rome, the rise of Constantine, and all that. It's like Rome fell, Constantine came into power. Hey, the millennium is beginning. Woo-hoo, we're in the church age now. which I think is kind of dangerous when you start putting Constantine in that position of bringing about this wonderful time period. So, but yeah, I can see some people making that argument without a doubt. I don't really land in any of those positions, to be quite honest. I'm not pre, post, or amillennial. Each one has certain things I might agree with, but too many things I disagree with. That it's hard for me to land in one place. And I think that's what makes the millennium a lot of fun, and challenging as well. It's like, well, what do I do with it then? If I can't really align it with anything I'm either experiencing now or looking forward to in a literal or figural sense, what am I supposed to do with it? I think that's what a lot of people want to ask. And I would say, do what John is doing. Look forward to a time when the Messiah will be in a time of ascendancy, and it's going to be a great period, especially for those who suffered. It may not be literal, but it's just meant to inspire us. That's what it's meant to do. We're on the winning side. May not feel like it in the moment, but we are on the winning side. And that's what the vision is meant to communicate to us.
Yeah, because John didn't have in mind what happened after the fall of Rome.
Yeah.
Right? I think he had in mind that the Rome would fall.
Yep.
Whatever that looked like, whether that was the end of time or the end of that era. But it's not like he then thought, oh, and then the Constantinian, would not have been
1,000
even
years
close
of the
to his
Byzantine Empire
consideration,
and all that kind
right?
of stuff.
I mean, that would be the amillennial way. I mean, they don't go that direction.
Oh, no,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that.
No.
Yeah.
Okay. Just to make, for all these things,
Right.
they understand, what John's doing.
Yeah.
And he's not trying to tell you the exact future. He's trying to tell you, it's really crappy right now. But, especially you or your family members who you've lost because they've been martyred. Mm-hmm. That's not the end for them. There's something better in store, right? And so, he's going to have this whole system of 1,000 years and things that happen, but to assume that he had it all blocked out, these ages in his mind, I think goes beyond what even he would have assumed.
Yeah. Well, and it's not hard to predict that the empire would fall, even though people are like, Rome, oh my gosh, nobody can defeat Rome. Militarily, culturally, economically, the most powerful empire we've ever seen. How could the empire ever fall? And I can see John going, you ever hear of Egypt, Assyria, Babylon? We've seen empires come and go, and they all end up falling. Rome's going to fall, and God will be the one to make sure it happens. Can he see beyond that? No, he doesn't know what's going to happen. He's not predicting the future, but it's not hard to say to his people, look, guys, this is just one empire in a series of empires, and they will fall as well. Rome and its system of imperial cult, someday it's just going to be relegated to the sands of time, which we can look back on and go, yep, all of those temples are gone. Rome is just a bunch of decaying ruins. Yeah, John was absolutely right.
Yeah, I have a hard time locating myself in those positions, and I have a hard time making too much of this chronology, or making it a centerpiece for Christian eschatology, because it's just the only passage that does this.
Exactly.
You have one passage that, it's unclear how exactly things are going on, because it's hard to use Scripture to interpret Scripture here.
Yeah.
Because no other passage that talks about the end of time, whether in the Old Testament or the New Testament, has this kind of special era for the martyrs baked into it. Right?
Yeah.
There is this hope for the martyrs, right? This, God's concern for them. You see that in the book of Daniel. They shine like the stars, right?
Yep.
There is a special concern God has for the martyrs. They are not going to be left out. They will receive their reward.
Yeah.
And this just seems to be John's way of saying God takes care of the martyrs.
Yeah.
And there is a section like that in other verses. But you just can't throw this 1,000-year period in the middle of the other chronologies of the Bible without running into certain tensions. You can't synthesize them very easily. Yeah. And it's even hard to know, for some people, this is part of Revelation that it tells the same story multiple times, right? And that 20 is the beginning of another telling. So actually, instead of picking up where 19 left off and tacking this 1,000 years at the end of that, they're saying, no, this is a new beginning, entering the story at a different point and then ending in the New Jerusalem, right? And so, man, there's just so many question marks about it that at the end of the day, I'm like, yeah, this passage just teaches me God's going to take care of the martyrs. Yeah. And that's all that first resurrection language stands for.
Yep.
Is a special thing God's going to do for the martyrs. Second resurrection, the rest of us participate in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point about, this reminds me of our study on women. why are we letting two outliers determine the entire theology?
Right. Yeah.
Right. This is the outlier. You read the rest of the things about resurrection. It's we all do it at the same time. Right. And all of a sudden, and so if this so it's about interpretive methods, and we need to be a little more careful with that. This is the outlier. But again, if it's touched such a weird genre on top of all that, I think a little more, reflection and being careful is called for. And I think you're exactly right, where the circular nature of Revelation, around and around and around again. Like, could we take 20 through 22 and put it on top of all the other circles that we've already gone through, and would it work? Probably. And that would make more sense of it than there's something brand new that we've never heard of before. We're just going to slip it in there near the end. It doesn't seem like what John's trying to do.
And is Revelation an exhortation to becoming a martyr? Kind of yeah, kind of no. I'm not saying that John is saying everybody needs to go out there and die. That's probably going a little bit too far. But I definitely think John is saying you need to be willing to. I'm not saying you're going to, but you need to be willing to, if that's what it comes down to. And as you guys have already said, we've said it many times, God's got a special place for those who make that ultimate sacrifice. Don't see it as defeat, see it as victory. The same way that when Jesus went to the cross, it was not shame, it was his glorification. And if you have to follow in those footsteps with Rome, you will be glorified as well.
Yeah. And if you want to use Scripture to interpret Scripture, I think the other Scriptures that need to be brought into the conversation is other passages that talk about the vindication of martyrs.
Yeah.
Not necessarily other passages that are given chronological time frames.
Right.
Right? Because that's not, first and foremost, what this is about.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Agree.
Well,
So, anything else?
Probably, but
Yeah,
we're out of time.
Yeah, we're up against the end of our time. So I hope that helps people understand that, the nature of the millennium, the two resurrections and everything there. If you have other questions, obviously you can shoot us an email and we can talk more about it on Facebook Messenger or email or whatever. But in the meantime, I think we're going to have to wrap it up for today. So thank you very much for joining us in this episode of the After Class Podcast. After Class, because
The best conversations happen
After class.